Hello, welcome back to our reading series of The Arab Role in Africa. This is Chapter 6, The End of a Pan-Arab Dream. The breakup of the United Arab Republic on the 28th of September 1961 brutally shattered the splendid dreams of the Arab nationalists in Cairo. The first great experiment in modern Arab unity ended after 3.5 years of disappointment and lamentable failure. It was an event of considerable importance, not only for the two countries concerned, but for the whole of the Arab world and Africa. The United Arab Republic, which aimed at being the nucleus of a vast Afro-Asian state, extending from the Persian Gulf to the Atlantic Ocean, disintegrated to the delight of the Syrians and the consternation of the Egyptians, without a blow being struck. When, in February 1958, Egyptians and Syrians had been required in a referendum to answer the question, "Do you approve of union between Egypt and Syria in a united Arab republic?" Only a few hundred had replied in the negative. An almost equally negligible number of them rejected the second question. "Do you approve the choice of Gamal Abdel Nasser as president of this republic?" 99.98% of the Syrian electors and nearly 100% of the Egyptian electors had declared themselves in favor of the United Arab Republic and of President Nasser as first head of the new state. The long-cherished dream of Arab nationalism seemed realized at last. For the first time in modern history, two Arab countries had agreed of their own free will to combine their destiny. The proposed union did not take the form of a confederation, like the one stipulated by the Arab League, or even a federation. It was an organic union, a complete fusion. An important stage on the road to the objective proposed by Nasser in his philosophy of the revolution seemed to have been passed. The rejoicing was almost general in the two provinces of the new republic. The dream of our ancestors is in the process of coming true. The day is not now far off when the Arab nation, from the Persian Gulf to the Atlantic, will form one whole, one single entity, prophesied the Syrian and Egyptian newspapers. In an orgy of hymns and military marches, the apostles of Pan-Arabism declared over the radio that the new United Arab Republic, open to all the Arab countries, would become the center of a unified Arab world, that it would not be slow in growing and in overthrowing all the obstacles which might arise in the path of Arab unity. In Damascus, where he was received on the proclamation of the UAR, Nasser was hailed as a hero whom the Arab nation has been awaiting since the time of the Crusades. The most pessimistic hardly dared voice their skepticism. Some Syrian politicians and the communists feared complete organic fusion and maintained that it would be better if each province retained its own personality. But their voices were lost in the chorus of high-flown praises. Even the Egyptian communists, divided as ever into more than one party, did not agree with them. They heartily applauded the birth of the new republic, which they believed would be a neutral, anti-imperialist, and inevitably pro-Soviet state. With Suez in 1956, Nasser thought that he had gained the most brilliant victory of his career. The first rejoicing was not slow, however, in giving place to disillusionment, soon followed by bitterness and anger. Basic differences existed between the two provinces of the new state. The leaders of the United Arab Republic endeavored to ignore them, deliberately brushing them aside. For Nasser, the success of the United Arab Republic was vital. As foreseen in his philosophy of the revolution, was not the United Arab Republic the first step on the path to association, covering the whole extent of Africa along the shores of the Mediterranean? Astride Africa and Asia, was not the United Arab Republic predestined, as also foreseen, to play an important international role, particularly within the Afro-Asian bloc? Entrenched in their state of mind, those who directed the United Arab Republic refused to take into account the real facts, and inevitably, these facts soon became more important than their obstinacy. The divergent conditions of the two countries were too real and deep. The standard of living among Syrians was higher than that of the Egyptians. More than 30% of the Syrians live in towns, compared with only 20% of their Egyptian compatriots. Syrian agriculture was more highly developed, a degree of mechanization having been introduced, while Egyptian agriculture has remained at a very rudimentary stage, and in some places more than 1,000 years out of date. The ordinary skilled Egyptian workman in Cairo earned an average of 30 piastres a day, whereas his Syrian counterpart received 2 or 3 times as much. The Syrian trade union movement had succeeded in becoming one of the strongest and best organized in the Arab world before the union of the two countries. In general, its influence was felt in parliament, in the streets, and throughout the political life of the country. In Egypt, however, the new Republican regime had in practice reduced the trade union movement to an offshoot of the government, after having purified it of communist elements, reorganized it, and reshaped it several times. The salaries and wages of civil servants were, similarly, higher in Syria than in Egypt. In social security, too, the northern province was ahead of the southern one. In general terms, more widespread disease and a higher birth rate gave Egypt a much lower standard of living than that of Syria. Since their economies were generally run on similar rather than on complementary lines, Egypt and Syria were bound inevitably to clash, in cotton and textile production, to quote only one example. Finally, Egypt was suffering from an apparently insoluble demographic problem, with an annual population increase of 500,000. Unemployment among workers in industry and agriculture, among university graduates, and those who had attended secondary schools had hardly decreased since the time of Farouk. Would not Egypt, then, be tempted to take advantage of the union with Syria in order to resolve some of her economic difficulties? Would she not try and pour into Syria her surplus workers and her unemployed intellectuals? In the political sphere, the cleavage between the two nations was emphatic. Nasser's regime had banned all political parties 6 months after the revolution of 23 July 1952. In 1954, after the abortive attempt to assassinate President Nasser, the Muslim Brotherhood had been outlawed and had become the object of unprecedented persecution. 6 of its leaders and active members had paid with their lives for the assassination attempt. Syria, on the brink of union with Egypt, revealed a quite different picture. After the downfall of General Shishakli in 1954, the country had experienced a tumult of political parties and allegiances all bitterly fighting for electoral support. A comparatively young grouping, the Arab Renaissance Socialist Party, Ba'ath, began spreading its influences throughout the country, especially among students, intellectuals, and the military, with the tempting passwords of Arab unity and socialism. As the price of unity, the Syrians were required to surrender their freedom to join together in parties. That was one of the chief conditions which President Nasser had laid down. Nasser persisted in wanting to accomplish unity at the summit, without carefully considering the differences which separated the two countries. It may appear a paradox that, in the face of all such differences, the Syrians should still have accepted and even sought unity with Egypt. Several factors seem to explain their attitude. A powerful current in favor of Arab nationalism has always drawn the mass of Syrians. They, more than the Egyptians, have always felt themselves the heralds of Arab nationalism. As far back as 1950, the spirit of unity among them was sufficiently strong for their constitution to stipulate, "The Syrian people are part of the Arab nation. They await the day when it will be a single people. They will use every effort to bring this about." Several years were necessary before this provision was written into the Egyptian constitution as well. But Syrian nationalism was for a long time directed toward the Asian Arabs, to Iraq, the Lebanon, and Jordan. It was to these countries that the bulk of Syrian Arab nationalists looked, jeering frequently at Egypt as that African country. Such generalizations are not sufficient to explain the strong feelings of unity which swept through Syria in 1956 to 1957, and which was the direct cause of the union with Egypt. During this period, Syria was constantly threatened by a series of plots and attempted coups d'état, and their repression led to a clear strengthening of the left and extreme left in the country. In October 1957, many Western observers predicted the imminent Bolshevization of Syria and her slipping into the Soviet orbit. For many Syrian politicians, only a rapid union with Egypt could counter this threat. The conservative circles in Syria, although conscious of the risks which a hurried union with Egypt could contain for them, nonetheless joined with the socialist Arabs to bring about the creation of the United Arab Republic. For reasons diametrically opposed, the two groups had come to the same conclusion that unity between Syria and Egypt had become a necessity. This Syro-Egyptian union gave President Nasser an important lever in the furtherance of his Arab policy. As head of an Afro-Asian country with more than 30 million inhabitants, the largest in Africa after Nigeria, He appeared in international bodies with enhanced authority. The plebiscite which made him first president of the United Arab Republic also conferred on him new claims to prestige in the rest of the Arab world and in Africa. The birth of the United Arab Republic allowed him to pursue and intensify the policy of positive neutralism on which he had embarked immediately after the Bandung Conference. The Syro-Egyptian Union provided something less than an edifying example to the Arab world in general, to the Maghreb, and to Africa. It proved the ineffectiveness of any union which ignored or neglected fundamental differences between the partner nations, and one, moreover, which was firmly based on authoritarian principles. From the very first months of unity, once the general rejoicing was over, it was clear to the world that the United Arab Republic was experiencing continual crisis, and that its very existence was being questioned by the Syrians. Accustomed to a vigorous political life, the Syrians began with increasing bitterness to complain of the new authoritarian government imposed on them by Cairo. The Egyptian leaders, for their part, quickly noted that most of the Syrian politicians who had advocated and promoted unity were now retreating, either to isolate themselves in hopes of change, or to exercise a feeble and timorous opposition. Most of the Syrian ministers who had signed the Act of Union withdrew altogether from the political scene. Even Shukri Kuwatli, the former president of the Syrian Republic, called since the Union the first Arab citizen, showed less and less enthusiasm for unity. From Syria, and from Egypt too, alarming reports reached the Arab and African countries of a police state, striking down all opposition to the regime. Notably in Syria, a huge police organization, with tentacles stretching throughout the country, fed upon an increasing slice of the national budget. Spies and police informers were everywhere, in factories, cafes, cinemas, offices, villages, and military units. Hundreds of Syrians were arrested for their opposition to the government, and some of them died under torture. Economically, the Union very quickly and naturally operated in favor of Egyptian businessmen. A number of Egyptian firms were set up in Syria and competed directly with their Syrian counterparts. The lowering of customs duties and even their complete withdrawal on whole groups of products could not but deal a severe blow to Syrian production, since markets were suddenly flooded with Egyptian goods. Syrian currency fell in the free market. Exports dropped drastically. In 1957, Syrian exports that had been worth 547 million Syrian pounds. In 1958, the first year of the Union, they fell to 420 million. Imports, on the other hand, rose during the same period from 616 to 729.6 million Syrian pounds. The country's balance of trade was severely upset and its economic and social stability dangerously threatened. Plans for industrialization, often quixotic, were drafted. Most of the time they were formulated at top level, without any consideration of local conditions. Most of them remained mere plans. In theory, they were intended to double the national revenue in 10 years. In fact, their application demanded efforts which would have weakened still further the Syrian economy, and which the Egyptians themselves were not really ready to make. Even in agriculture, whose products were the chief articles of Syrian export, the situation deteriorated. The year 1958 was particularly difficult. Exports of wheat fell from 352,807 tons to 177,834 tons. Those of barley from 331,416 to 89,560 tons. Moreover, a persistent drought compelled Syria, a country which traditionally exported grain, to import it in 1959, 1960, and 1961. A program of economic unification, also conceived at the top, was hurriedly promoted without serious preparation. Syria, formerly an exporter of silk and cotton goods, began to import them from Egypt. During the first 4 months of 1959, she imported from Egypt 370,000 pounds worth of spun silk and cotton and 290,000 pounds worth of cotton goods. Several textile mills closed, others reduced production. The high cost of Syrian labor made real competition with Egyptian goods difficult and often impossible. In order to compete at all effectively, it would have been necessary either to establish customs barriers for an unspecified time between the two provinces, an unprecedented step for a single state to take, or to lower the living standards of the Syrian people. Finally, the deterioration in relations between the United Arab Republic and Qassem's Iraq led to the ultimate rupture of economic relations between Iraq and the Syrian province. Syria was deprived of her natural market, and Syrians ate 2-month-old frozen Russian or Chinese meat rather than the fresh meat which could be provided by Iraq. Numerous restrictive measures, hurriedly determined, led to a substantial increase in smuggling, which in turn caused a worsening of the economic position and deprived the Syrian treasury of part of its revenues. An efficient smuggling ring conducted profitable operations between Syria on the one hand and the Lebanon and Turkey on the other. In order to combat it, the Egyptian authorities would have had to station a whole army of policemen and administrators on the frontiers, costing far more than any advantage to be gained. If they ever entertained the idea, they soon dismissed it. With his concern for welding the two provinces together, Nasser promulgated in Syria an agrarian reform program similar to that promoted in Egypt. His measures for economic unity had brought him opposition from businessmen. His agrarian reforms antagonized the landowners as well. Nasser did not, however, gain the support of the masses of workers and peasants to counterbalance this, though his social and economic reforms, if they had been real, would normally have assured it. The mass of Syrian workers instead saw their living standards fall through unemployment. Thousands were reported to have immigrated to the Lebanon and other Arab countries during the first 2 years of union. And so Nasser gradually lost the support of those who had backed him at the start. The breakup of the union was only a matter of time. On all sides, Nasser was asked to reconsider the foundations of the union, to reestablish democracy in the country, to bring to an end the abuses of the police state, and to permit once more an economic freedom to revive the moribund Syrian economy. He did nothing. For a moment in 1959, he envisaged a form of federation which would have restored to Syria her local power while waiting for conditions to change in favor of a more advanced form of union. But he abandoned the idea. The power of the police increased. It brought in its train hatred and corruption, which burnt like acid into the whole structure of Syrian administration. A policy for the unification of parliamentary and government institutions, likewise a hurried and ill-considered plan, caused the transfer of Syrian members and ministers to Cairo. There, too, unity was decreed from above, without any thought for local conditions and a political and administrative void. The experiment of a single-party system, the National Union, failed in Egypt. Its failure in Syria was even more marked, since the National Union there was never more than a government department, inactive and torpid. It sank under the control of the police of Abdul Hamid Siraj, a Syrian, and was soon abandoned by the few Syrians who had ever really believed in it. Complaints and criticisms multiplied. Those businessmen who asked for a relaxing of government control were accused of wanting to reestablish capitalism and feudalism. Those who sought the reorganization of the Syro-Egyptian Union on new foundations, with more regard paid to the character of each region, were accused of being opportunists or reactionaries. Nasser played his last trump with drastic social reforms in July 1961. Agrarian reform became even more radical, with equally uncertain hopes of success. The law on profit sharing with the workers constituted an unprecedented step in the history of Egypt and Syria. But while in Egypt no political force appeared to oppose the application of these reforms, in Syria Nasser had generated a widespread discontent around himself. The army revolt of 28 September 1961 encountered only negligible opposition in the country, and most of the little resistance that existed came from non-Syrian minorities, Egyptian and Palestinian refugees. Having threatened the Syrian mutineers with his thunderbolts, Nasser soon had to admit defeat. It was, as he said himself, the greatest setback in his career. So strong is the feeling for Arab unity in Syria that the revolutionaries in Damascus affirmed in one of their first communiques that they had revolted only to correct the deviationists, who had departed from the sacred path of Arab unity. The Arab nation has revolted in Syria to stamp out deviation and deviationists, those who have struck at the heart of the sacred Arab unity for which generations in the past have shed their blood and have sacrificed themselves. And, likewise proclaiming the principles of Arab unity, Nasser affirmed his intention, at dawn on 28 September, to combat the minority of misguided people who seek to strike down the sacred banner of Arab nationalism. It took Nasser only 48 hours to realize that the game had already been lost. With tears in his eyes, he declared in a broadcast on 30th September that he had ordered the Egyptian troops who had landed at Latakia to surrender without a fight. The first experiment in modern Arab unity had failed. Another dream of the Arab nationalists had ended in disillusionment. The consequences of the breakup of the United Arab Republic rapidly spread far beyond the frontiers of the two countries. For the Egyptians, the Syrian revolt was nothing more than an operation by reactionary allies of the imperialists. Cairo radio summed up the official attitude in a declaration on 1st October 1969. Quote, "By its reactionary nature, this movement tends to ensure the return of the reign of feudalism, arbitrary government, and capitalism, and the domination of monopoly with the aim of preserving the interests of imperialists and foreigners in Syria." Al-Gumhiriya, the official organ of the Egyptian government, recognized the seriousness of the setback and stated, "The Syrian revolt is the second disaster in modern Arab history. The Arab nation has suffered two disasters in recent history. The first in 1948 when the Arabs lost Palestine. The second in September 1961 when the Syrian revolt destroyed the United Arab Republic." But for all Arabs and Africans, the collapse of the United Arab Republic taught a different lesson. The union of two or several states ought not to be imposed from above, but should spring from the popular will and correspond to local circumstances. Egyptian Arab nationalism, Nasserism, may have misused a profound sentiment of the Arab masses, but the sentiment remains strong. The profession of faith by most of the present Arab leaders in Arab nationalism and the expression of their conviction that Arab unity in some form or other will one day be brought about indicate perfectly the depth of this sentiment. Just as the failure of the Mali Federation in 1960 did not mark the end of Pan-Africanism, so the failure of the Syro-Egyptian experiment has not caused this feeling of solidarity among Arabs to disappear. The theorists and the prophets of Arab nationalism will no doubt, if they draw the right conclusions from the failure of the United Arab Republic, envisage something other than an organic fusion which takes no account of regional characteristics, the differences in living standards, in customs, in political and social traditions. They may look for a formula midway between the half-hearted confederation of the Arab League and the violent organic union of the United Arab Republic. Doubtless, too, they will realize that unity, as a federation or a confederation, or in any other form, cannot be brought about suddenly, but must be the result of a gradual process, probably protracted and never easy. Just as Pan-Africanism during the last decade has undergone important transformations and is interpreted differently in different places, so Arab nationalism has endured a great upheaval. When he spoke of the failure of the Mali experiment, President Modibo Keïta explained it chiefly by the important gulf that existed between the economic and social structures of the formerly French Sudan and Senegal, with the former on the whole poorer and less developed than the latter. That, he said, is the first lesson to be learnt from the unfortunate experiment. From the outset, two African countries which unite must agree on the principles of their economic and social structures, and especially on the agrarian problem. The failure of the Egypto-Syrian experiment contains similar lessons. It shows not only that the social and economic gulf between the two countries was far too great to be bridged by any artificial union, but also that it opened the way to all sorts of abuses and conflicts. The union between Egypt and Syria manifestly operated in favor of the Egyptians, to such an extent that the Syrians complained of a neo-colonial policy of the pharaohs. The failure of the United Arab Republic clearly indicates that, no matter how great may be the mystique of Arab solidarity, it is not yet sufficient to bring about an economic and social conjunction. And the same is true of Pan-Africanism. From now on, Arab nationalism, to which most Arabs are loyal, cannot have the same meaning. Nasserism, or Egyptian Arab nationalism, misused inter-Arab solidarity, the natural leaning of the Arab towards unity. Any other attempt, similar to the United Arab Republic, cannot but fail if it does not take into account the different, complex interests of the majorities participating in it. There is also a conservative Arab nationalism, which dreams of making Arab unity a union of castes, of privileged social strata, of monarchies and feudalism, as in the Arab Federation which was proclaimed in February 1958 between Jordan and Iraq, and which was harshly broken by the Iraq Republican Revolt on 14th of July 1958. Such a union was artificial too, since it depended precisely upon the union of two monarchies, both of which were considered by many Arabs to be more or less remote from the people. It was bound to fail. Then there was the Federation of Arab States between the United Arab Republic and the Yemen, founded just after the creation of the United Arab Republic between a republic which professed socialism and an absolute feudal monarchy. This union has always remained no more than a scrap of paper, despite the creation of a federal government, one which eventually ceased to hold meetings and which had in any case been merely formal. This union also failed and was officially buried in December 1961. Henceforth, the very concept of Arab nationalism will have to undergo important changes, already heralded by certain Arab thinkers and politicians. Such thinkers reject the idea of Arab union in any form, between all Arabs regardless. They want union between Arab states which have achieved the same degree of political and economic development, and which enjoy similar economic and social structures. It is more or less this evolutionary development that Nasserism, or Egyptian Arab nationalism, wishes to undergo following its bitter defeat at Damascus. The pro-Nasser Arab nationalists hold that inter-Arab unity is henceforth indissolubly bound up with the struggle against rich, reactionary Arabs, the allies of colonialism, who they declare constitute the principal obstacle to the reunification of the Arab people. Nasser interprets the Syrian revolt of 28th September, which was in the main a revolution for national independence, aiming to free Syria from Cairo's rule, as nothing more than a manifestation of the class struggle, a battle joined between Egyptian socialists and the reactionary capital landowners of Syria. The pro-Nasser Egyptians maintain that the Arabs are now divided into two camps, one progressive because it is poor and socialist, the other reactionary because it is capitalist. Only socialist progressive Arabs, they add, can be true Arab nationalists, fervently patriotic, anti-colonialist, and anti-communist. The others, the reactionaries or the Arab opportunists, are false nationalists, who inevitably become the allies of colonialism, like Hussein of Jordan, or agents of Moscow, like Khaled Bakhdadi, secretary of the Syrian Communist Party. Arab nationalism has undergone an important development, forced upon it by the experience of several unfortunate unions, by the internal evolution of Arab countries, and by international conditions. Yet it retains a coherence which moves all Arab countries alike when confronted by certain dangers and threats. Example, the danger from Israel, the imperialist threat, and for many, the communist danger. In the theoretical case of an invasion of Jordan by Israel, Nasser would go to the help of Hussein, although he considers the king a traitor and the son of a traitor. This feeling of solidarity among all Arabs, which seems to rise above all quarrels and differences of outlook, is still, in itself, a force of considerable power, which even the breakup of the United Arab Republic did not destroy.